Hello, so this is my mind map for my risk management class. At the center of the mind map, well, hold on, let me back up. This mind map took me about, I want to say, 10 to 15 minutes to make. And at the center of it, I have risk. And when it comes to risk, there's different things that you have, categories that you have to think about when you think about risk. And it goes with first identifying the risk, and then you have to assess the risk, and then you have to figure out how you're going to handle the risk. And I have it kind of in that order, going around in a vicious cycle. Uh, that's pretty much risk management. But when it comes to identifying risk, there's different variables to it. So, and there's different kinds of risk. When you're identifying risk, you can identify pure risk. You have to identify first if it's internal or external. There's liability risk, human resource risk, all types of risks. And when it comes to pure risk, we want to think about those tangible and intangible uh, assets that a business can have. Those real risks to those real assets. And you want to think about Coca-Cola. One of uh, their formula for their soda is intangible asset to them. I guess in what do you call it, intellectual property, and they run the risk of that getting out to the public, so they keep it secure. They have legal bindings to make sure it doesn't get out and that no one else can use that formula. So that they have patents and things like that to keep that safe. Um, Internal and external risks, that goes into controllability. How well can you control uh, this problem from happening, or if it does happen, how well can you control the impact it has? And when I think about that, I think about Hope City. That was one of the cases we did where there was a new police chief in a town, and he was trying to identify risk, and he went and he started talking to people internally and externally to figure out what different risks were that the police department had that could pose a problem for the police department. And he then started to think about and talk to others about methods of controlling the risk. But first, he started with identifying all the different types of risk and all the different avenues. So you talked to all different departments about, the issues that arise for them and their risks, and how that affects the police department. So I think that was a pretty good example when it comes to identifying risk. And you come over here to liability risk, where it talks about damages, compensatory and punitive. Talk about defense and what does it say? Defense and negligence suits. We have human resource risks, where key employees, workers' compensation, benefits. That made me think about Nerds Galore, because for them, a lot of their risk came from a lack of training and lack of compensation for their current employees. And that goes into, I should have put that with workers' compensation, but I put it with benefits, because I believe if the workers had other benefits to being at the job, then they probably would have cared less about the compensation. Because when you come into a business such as computer technology and you work for a business, it's more so about what you're doing than less about the pay. But the pay is still important. But I think if they got some better benefits there, they probably would have been more tempted to stay. But I think I didn't talk about assessment. So after you identify risk, you have to think about risk assessment. You have to assess the risk and figure out, its frequency slash severity or impact. So when you think about risk, you want to talk about how likely it is to happen and how severe of an impact it can have. And I think about Nerds Galore when I think about that, because their major problem is many of their employees were undertrained and were incapable of handling the tougher jobs when it came to, I guess, cybersecurity and things of that nature for the more intense clients. So they weren't able to adequately perform, and eventually that's going to be a big problem for them, and their reputation won't hold up for much longer if they're not able to do what's asked of them, if they're not competent, and capable of doing the jobs that they claim to be able to. So that's a big risk for them. And they already identified it. And when they were assessing it, they decided, actually, they didn't even decide, but I think they should stay with uh, the lower difficulty clientele. But also, after you go from frequency and severity, you can think about combinations and loss distribution. And after you go from assessment, you go to handling. And when it comes to handling risk, uh, you want to think about, loss finances such as insurance and hedging. You want to have these financial mechanisms in place to make sure that if you do run into some loss, that you're financially, sound, or things that keep you from running into those financial risk in the first place, such as hedging. When it comes to handling, there's also different handling techniques. Duplication is another thing when it comes to handling, and I think FAMU needs better duplication when it comes to storing information. When we spoke to the CCO, she talked about how some departments only have things in physical, like paper form, and there's no online database for a lot of documentation. So when it comes to like years after using those documentations, when they need them back, it's kind of a long process to get that documentation. Sometimes is just missing. I think they need to have a lot more duplication of files to avoid the risk of losing information and key documents. There's also the transference of risk. When it comes to handling, you want to transfer that risk onto someone else or to something else or to another party. And when it comes to handling, the three things you want to primarily think about when you come to handling risk is if you're going to prevent it, if you're going to reduce it, or you're going to avoid the risk. And that makes me think about the reluctant general counsel, because when it came to their specific situation, they chose to prevent the risk. Well, the CEO decided to completely prevent the risk altogether of getting that documentation put out to the general public by forming a risk team. They decided to instead just distribute or transfer the responsibility of risk onto the different management levels, as opposed to creating a team, which would then put them at the risk of giving competitors competitive advantage over them, which was unnecessary. But yeah, this is my risk mind map. Hope you like it. All right, have a good one.